So let's look at my own commentary. What we've been looking at is a commentary that's available on my website at tetzetorah.com. And we've looked at historic Christian perspectives. We've learned that the basic kind of default Christian allegory of the explanation or interpretation is that Jesus is explaining that his own theology and teachings and ideology are so radically new and different and incompatible with the existing worldview of Judaism and their commandment keeping and focus on keeping the law of Moses and things like that. Yeshua's way of walking in God's ways or being faithful to God is so radically different because it's faith-based instead of works-based, supposedly. It's so radically different that it necessitated a change or a replacement. So in basic Christian forms of interpretation or allegory of this passage, almost to a T, what you'll find is something that is akin to replacement theology, where the old is out and the new is in. And in this statement of old and new, the old is Judaism and the new is Christianity, with everything that it entails. Law of Moses is out, law of Christ is in. Old Covenant's out, New Covenant's in, Old Testament's out, New Testament's in, Jews are out, Christians are in, Gentile Christians are in, the synagogue is out, the church is in, whatever you want to fill in blanks. It all kind of amounts to the same form of replacement theology, which I soundly reject. And so we've looked at different authors, different Christian perspectives. We looked at a messianic perspective, and now we're turning in our final thoughts to Tim Hegg, one of my favorite messianic Jewish authors. And here's where we left off 2 weeks ago before the break. So let me just follow along with me on the screen and I'll read it. This is my own thoughts. Having sufficiently explained a theologically more sound way to understand the parable of the patch, Tim Hegg drives his point home with this summary of the wine parable and the overall context of Yeshua's teaching on the subject. We left off kind of right in the middle of that last week, so I just picked it up again where we left off. Started over. Here's what Tim Hegg has to say. Oops, that again. Okay, this is Tim Hegg. The contrast is not between old wine as that which is unwanted, and new wine as that which is now desirable. Remember, that's basically the kind of historic perspective that we gain when we look at the parable. I also reminded you in these studies that there's a kind of a common sense aspect built into Yeshua's parables as well. The idea that if you're patching an old garment, let me back up. The idea, if you're having a wedding, that it is desirable to feast rather than fast. That it's desirable to rejoice rather than to mourn. It's kind of common sense, right? It's kind of morbid if you think about it. Why would you hold a wedding and then have everybody mourning and fasting, right? Can you imagine showing up at a wedding where everyone's wearing sackcloth and ashes and, and going, woe is me, the bride and the groom are getting married. Oh, whoa, oy vey. Right? The themes are just, they're displaced, right? They don't work. So I almost think that Yeshua kind of looked at those who questioned him as to why he wasn't fasting. He almost looked at them and said, duh, why would you fast at a wedding? And of course, that was the opportunity for Yeshua to explain to them that I am the long-awaited bridegroom that God the Father promised to bring to the bride Israel, right, in this divine marriage that's taking place. So that's common sense. So when Yeshua launches into his parables about putting a patch on an unshrunk path on a piece of old cloth, a new patch on an old cloth, and the challenges that crop up with not shrinking one of them first, right? That's common sense, at least for his day. Maybe not so much today, because we've lost a lot of common sense in our day. Likewise with his parable about the introducing new wine into old wineskins, right? Common sense in that day would suggest that you have to condition the wineskins first, or at least bring in something else. So there's a lot of common sense built into the parable that is enough that we don't have to kind of fall back into the allegory of the replacement theology that's taught by traditional Christian circles. It seems like I'm picking on traditional Christianity at this point, but it's for good measure. Most rabbinic Jews that I have ever encountered or ever read about or ever studied or interacted with on any level are going to repudiate the idea of replacement theology and supersessionism and many of the tenets of dispensationalism. They don't like to be on the receiving end of, hey, guess what? You guys are out and we're in. Right? God's replacing us. You guys had your chance, now you're out, right? Get lost. So that message isn't received too well in Jewish circles, and it shouldn't be, because it's not biblical. So let's keep going with Tim Hegg. He says, in both cases, the wine is essentially the same, and that is, it begins with grape juice, right, new wine, and becomes wine through fermentation. So he's explaining the details, and now he's supplying us with a better way to understand this passage. In fact, this section of my commentary, if you can see the little blue strip across the top, if you're watching this video, is entitled A Better Way to Understand This Passage.